We're live now. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming to our summer school. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate the amount of people who've come to this session, you know. And this is session 6. How to ensure that the cost of transition to a zero carbon economy is shared. So I'm just going to facilitate this. I'm not going to do most of the talking. I'm going to let the candidates do most of the talking. So we have Dr. Jamie Gorman, Professor Jennie Stevens, and Councillor Ronan Moore, who are our panelists today. So the first up is Dr. Jamie Gorman. He is a lecturer in the Department of Applied Social Studies in Maynooth University. Jamie is a published author on the topic of climate change, notably on community work approach to climate change and climate justice. His PhD thesis is Jumping Scales and Influencing Outcomes, a case study of community development for environmental justice, which is a study of Love Leitrim, a rural community group that successfully campaigned against extraction of shale gas by hydraulic methods, i.e. fracking. So, Jamie, thank you very much, and delighted you could make it today.
Great, Bill. Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be going first, to be honest, because I don't know what it'd be like to follow Jennie. So I'm glad I can get my presentation out of the way, sit back and enjoy Jennie and Ronan's. And thanks for the introduction, Bill. I think you've kind of summed up why I'm here quite well. And this question that we're looking at today, how do we ensure the cost of transitioning to a zero carbon economy is shared? This is a question of justice and a question of fairness in the distribution of risks in the transition process, which is absolutely important. But I'd like to widen it out a little bit more, actually, and ask about what about the benefits of the transition? How can we also ensure that communities and groups, especially those most marginalized in the current status quo, are positively impacted by the transition? So, you know, not just a question of burdens and risk, but also benefits. And, you know, we might say, how can we make the benefits of the transition irresistible? Not just how do we manage the risks? And although I am an academic, at heart I'm a community worker, and my PhD was in community development. And so just to say a little bit about that, community development is really centrally about questions of solidarity and agency. And by solidarity, I mean coming together to foster collective bonds of care, mutuality, interdependence in communities. And by agency, I mean the capacity of people to order their own worlds, to create, to produce, and to change on their own terms. So these questions of solidarity and agency are really crucial, I think, in the transition process, and also they're very live for me right now with the pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, and and deal with the climate crisis, but also looking at issues of particularly in our urban communities. I come from a council estate myself. Issues of drugs, issues of gangs, xenophobia, and the rise of the far right. This is the larger context in which we are also asking these questions around climate change, and we can't ignore them and box them off from the question of the just transition. So for me, the question is, how do we use what is sometimes seen as a very technical process of decarbonisation as a tool to bring together communities, to contribute to that deeper work of building solidarity and in society and building people's agency in communities, particularly with a justice-focused lens in the communities and amongst the groups that are most marginalised, as I said. So from that perspective, it's not about creating or crafting the perfect policy instrument, be it just a carbon tax or a generous grant scheme for retrofitting, although of course they're important. It's not about coming up with amazing technical solutions like decentralised smart grids, although they'll surely be part of the solution. For me, a just transition requires a more radical vision, a vision that gets to the roots of the issue and the issues at stake in the time of the climate crisis, which I think are how do we relate to one another and how do we relate to the planet. And to my mind, the dominant Western mindset is what Bell Hooks calls the mindset of patriarchal white supremacist capitalism. it drives us to, towards a tendency of individualizing, atomizing ourselves, and sort of shrinking narrowly inwards, and becoming competitive, comparing ourselves to others and competing with others for scarce resources. It encourages us to exploit ourselves, and as much as it normalizes the exploitation of ourselves as workers, it normalizes the exploitation of the planet as a source of raw materials and as a dumping ground for waste. So this is, for me, the core of the challenge, that we need to address. And attempting to address it just with policy measures or technical measures won't get to the root cause of the issue. And I think in Ireland, actually, we're quite lucky. We have a head start in addressing this issue, because I don't think we've entirely forgotten what it means to be in community. We have high rates of volunteering, we have strong local community organisations, and overall, a really good sense of social solidarity, which I think has been proven again by our response to the pandemic in large parts. So, returning to that question of how do we ensure, the question as I tweaked, how do we ensure the cost of transition, but also the benefits are shared? There's no simple formula. I don't think, and it requires this radical vision and a commitment to deep work and deep questioning. But although there's no formula, I do think there are certain things we can begin to do as a starting point. And the first one is to begin to open up space for a diversity of voices and perspectives, for difficult conversations and for conflict, and managing that in society. How we move towards a transition, will cause conflict, is causing conflict, because there's a diversity of interests and a diversity of perspectives. And a radical democratic approach would be to recognise that and look to how we manage those conversations and that conflict in a pluralistic way. So in that sort of way of working, I imagine an approach to inclusion that empowers those marginalized voices, marginalized groups, beyond tokenistic consultation. That means addressing the barriers to participation for all those groups in society. And I'm thinking in the Irish context, class issues, working class communities, also travellers, minority ethnic communities, and gender disparities that need to be addressed in terms of creating broad-based, the conditions for broad-based democratic deliberation. We need to provide place for critical thinking, for reflection, for visioning, for people to discuss and understand diverse perspectives in order to find ways forward. And in all of that, focusing, as I said, on supporting the agency of the most marginalised, trusting people to make good, effective decisions. So that's the first thing that I think we need to explore and develop. The second is that when we talk about climate action in terms of carbon tax, in terms of energy systems, decarbonisation, these words like mitigation, adaptation, which anybody that is in the climate policy field will be familiar with, they make no sense to people outside of that narrow field, and they don't connect with people's hearts and minds. They don't connect with their lived realities. And so that's the second crucial thing that we need to think about. How do we connect climate action to people's daily lives? In the old community organising adage, how do we start where people are at and work with them from there? And when I talk about starting where people are at and connecting with people's daily lives, I'm not talking about individualising climate action. I don't know if anybody else has read this, but I read Rebecca Solnit's recent article in The Guardian just the other day, and it actually really shocked me to realise that the term carbon footprint was actually developed by British Petroleum, BP, the oil and gas company, by their marketing department, in order to displace responsibility for the climate crisis away from the oil and gas companies and encourage the public to take up personal responsibility and see it as their personal choice their personal carbon footprint, which was driving the problem. And therefore, then the solution is for individuals to bear the brunt of the responsibility of managing their carbon footprint, rather than the oil and gas companies addressing their role in the systemic creation of pollution, or governments taking responsibility for managing the transition away from fossil fuels. So I'm not talking about individual responsibility, but I am talking about people feeling a sense of ownership in their communities, people feeling a sense of solidarity and a sense of agency, that they can do something collectively together to address the problem. And so how do we connect climate action to people's daily lives? Well, we talk about the food that they eat. We talk about the energy that they consume. We talk about the transport that they use. We talk about the jobs that they do. And we bring climate action into those spaces. And the solutions in terms of a just transition in those areas are already there. Local food systems, community supported agriculture, food sovereignty. These are rich fields of thought and practices that have already begun to really demonstrate the sorts of ways in which we can develop our food system so that it can be resilient to the climate crisis, that they can respond to the biodiversity emergency, and that it can produce locally produced organic food at a lower cost that has greater availability to all in the community. So we're talking about access to food, we're talking about locally produced and healthy organic food, and we're talking about a food system that's good for the planet. So the solutions are there in terms of how we build our food system differently, and particularly using community and locality as a sort of a way to reshape the food system. Similarly with the energy system, and I think that the other speakers are better qualified than me to speak about the energy system, but and I'm sure they will touch on that. But community ownership of renewable energy, to my mind, is a crucial way forward. And in Ireland, we have the SEAI developing this with the Sustainable Energy Communities program, and I know Ronan is involved in that in his community. I'm sure we'll touch on that. We also have Community Power now, which is a national energy utility that you can sign up to, so your electricity will be provided by these community projects, and the excess from the community projects is sold into the grid, and then you can buy it back. So you can be supporting those community projects, and so there's a huge potential there in community energy projects. And then we have local economic systems, and thinking about how we design our local economies in a way that brings wealth back into the community, supports local jobs, and is resilient. And in that, I'm very much inspired by models like the Preston model in the UK, where they've used the very simple mechanism of procurement to drive investment in the local economy. So they've approached what they call anchor institutions in the local community, so local hospitals, local universities, big organizations that have big yearly spends in the local community, and got those organizations to commit to spending locally, so procuring the things that they need to procure, whether it be food for the hospital or supplies for the university, as locally as possible, and then that has obviously a knock-on effect in supporting local businesses, supporting local jobs, keeping money in the local economy. So local economic systems, I think, is another crucial element of bringing climate action into people's lives and their daily reality.
Hey, Jamie, just 1 minute to go if you want to.
Okay, Bill, thanks. Yeah. So my last point, and these seem sort of almost like utopian ideas. I might say, if only we had groups of people trained and ready to go to do this work in local communities and an infrastructure in place to do it. Well, we do. We have community workers and we have youth workers in every single community across the country. We have local community development committees, children's and young people's services committees, public participation networks. So this is the infrastructure of the community sector. And we have trained professionals in every community with significant expertise in working with hard to reach, marginalized and disadvantaged groups to support their effective and their collective participation, their empowerment. And their knowledge and skills, I think, will be crucial, and it needs to be harnessed if we are to ensure that the transition is fast and is effective and is fair. So that's my you know, if I've got any key takeaway, it's that we have a community sector that needs to be harnessed, or that can be really effectively harnessed in order to drive forward this transition and ensure that that we're not just mitigating for the risks, but we're also bringing the benefits of the transition to communities across Ireland.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you very much for that. I know the message you're trying to get across is you know what a lot of us all believe in. I'd say you could talk much longer, because you know you really, it shows that you know your stuff, and that always tells, you know. So we're going to go. If you have any questions, could you stick them in the chat, please, and just stick it in there. We have one question coming in, and what we're going to go is to the Menti question. So if the admin have put up the questions now online, just show people what the question is, and at the very end then we're going to have a general discussion chat with all our panelists, if that's okay. Okay, so if you go to menti.com and use the code, as you can see at the very top there, 1990-8299, 1990-8299, and the question is, who bears the greatest responsibility for our response to climate change? Is it 1, governments, 2, members of the public, 3, private companies? So if you could go have a look at that. It's starting to come there now, and you know, we can see what people, the responsibility. Interesting that the governments are coming ahead of members of the public. The private companies are coming in second. Yeah, a lot of people voted there. That seems to be so. There's Jamie. What do you think of that now? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm thinking actually about something that Bill McKibben, the climate activist, wrote about years ago. He talked about individual action as, you know, say me, and then you, Bill, and then you know, the next person, and then the next person taking action. That's a sort of an addition approach, whereas, you know, government making policy and legislation and driving forward change that way is a multiplication approach, and we need that multiplication approach. You know, yes, each individual can do something, but we're at the stage now with the scale and urgency of this crisis that we need collective action on societal scale, and only government can deliver that.
And as a politician myself, you know, I at the start I thought, you know, we need action, but what really is important is for sustainable going forward. And you see other parties is to change the policy. If the policy changes, it is more sustainable as regards going forward into when the politicians are gone. You know, that you know, that if you make strong policy that can't be changed, that will take, you know, because it's a strong, it's based on fact, it's based on science, it can't be challenged to reverse it. You know, it's much easier, it's actually quite harder to get rid of something than actually create something, I think, you know. And like the American system, whereby one president comes in and does one thing, the other comes in and does the other thing, that's actually the terrible model, I believe, and that's probably where they are. But I think I find, you know, I have changed my view. I would have thought it would be personal, and but companies are coming on, aren't they? What do you think? I think companies are getting that bit better. Companies that are not involved in the fossil fuel industry.
Well, companies will always go where the money is, and you know, movements like the divestment movement have really made it clear that people are not going to stand any longer for investment in fossil fuels. But I do think your point is an interesting one. We do need to change hearts and minds as well. It's not just about placing responsibility on representative democracy and people elected every 5 years or so to go and make decisions. It is also how do we cultivate a sense of, as I said, solidarity, agency, and ownership in our communities, so that we turn to one another and we think, well, what can we do? What do we need to do together? So that's the sort of the mind shift I think that also needs to occur alongside policy making, legislation, things like that.
Yeah, you're right. Good. No, you're right. You're dead right there. Okay, so we're going to have a more general question answer at the end, and Jamie, you'll be able to come back in again there for different things. But at the moment, we're going to go talk to Professor Jennie Stevens. Jennie Stevens, she's a professor, obviously, academic researcher, author, and I suggest her books. You should look up her books. She's very competent in what she has written about. Social justice advocate. She's currently the director of School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs Policy at Northeastern University in Boston. Her research mainly focuses on renewable energy transformation, energy democracy, energy resilience, gender and energy, climate and energy justice, and climate engineering. She's the author of Diversifying Power: Why We Need Anti-Racist Feminist Leadership on Climate and Energy, Smart Grid, Revolution, Evolution. Now, that's only a very small piece of her bio. She's highly qualified to talk to us today, and we thank you very much for coming to us. We are quite privileged to have you here. So, Jennie, you have 15. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you, everyone. Great to be here and be included in this important session, and such a great program that you've put together for the summer school, and great to be part of this this session in particular. And I also want to thank my cousin Una Morrison, who connected me with this and invited me to participate. So what Jamie talked about is very much aligned with what I would like to share with you and talk about. And as Bill mentioned, I have a recent book that I'm going to just summarize a little bit briefly, and because it brings up many of these points that I think are really key, and it actually gets to the question also that people just responded to about who bears the responsibility, and it's really linked, and I see it kind of in a systems way where governments also are us, right? Are responding to the public and also to the private sector and corporations. So they're very linked together, and we can talk more about that. So what I would like to do here is actually try to share the screen. Can you, is it sharing? Let's see.
Yeah, we got it there. Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So the title of my book is Diversifying Power: Why We Need Anti-Racist Feminist Leadership on Climate and Energy. And sorry, did it? There we go. And what I want to emphasize here is that when I talk about leadership, I think we're all leaders in different ways, in our families, in our communities. When we talk about leadership, it's not just the elected officials and the CEOs of companies and things like that. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, when I talk about anti-racist feminist leadership, I'm really talking about being aware of the power dynamics that give privilege to some and marginalize others in a systemic way. And I think that's fundamental, and that's what's been lacking in the climate action space. So let's see here. Can't seem to move my, oh, there we go. So what I wanted to talk about is how climate and energy are actually linked with economic injustice and this widening income and wealth gap. This is in the United States. These figures, this figure here but I wanted to show it because it's the same pattern is emerging in places around the world, including in Ireland, where wealth and income, we have this concentration of wealth and power, and the people who are doing well in the current system don't want change and they're resisting the change, whereas others are really getting worse and worse off. And during the pandemic, this has even been exacerbated and made even worse. And as you can see, this is completely unsustainable. Like if this continues, you know, we're going to just have all kinds of societal breakdowns that we've started to see. And it's really problematic. And so the one way to think about this and why it's related to climate and energy is really because acknowledging what Dario Kenner talks about, the polluter elite, which are those who are really profiting from the fossil fuel systems and so many, how those are connected to so many other things. And they've been really for decades investing strategically to resist the transformation that we need. So a lot of current research, and part of what I try to do is help us reveal the impact of this resistance to transformation so that we can facilitate and accelerate the changes that we know. And I agree completely with what Jamie said about we have the technology, and it's not, I think part of the challenge is that we've been investing too much in technological innovation and not enough in social innovation. So what I talk about, really, the polluter elite, part of the challenge has really been this investing in a misinformation campaign to confuse people about the challenges of climate and climate science, and then undermining public trust in government. That's actually quite strategic, because if we don't trust our government and we don't invest, and then we are kind of thinking, oh, there's nothing we can do with this challenge. And then also some of these same actors have also been minimizing worker protections and worker rights, and that has contributed to strengthening the corporate influence on our government. So I wanted to connect that, and that's kind of the starting point of a lot of my work is focusing in and connecting the climate and energy challenge with economic injustice. So I really have proposed that the climate crisis is really a crisis in leadership, and that for too long now, we've been thinking about the climate and climate policy separate from other issues. And if there's one kind of take-home message, and I think this is very consistent also with what Jamie was talking about, is that we need to integrate climate action into everything else, including jobs and economic policy, health and food and housing and transportation. It's all integrated. And rather than thinking about climate change as a technical issue that we need to, technocratic solutions to, we really need to be thinking very much about social dynamics. And that's this, what I proposed and what I talk about a lot is this idea of energy democracy, which is recognizing that the transformation away from fossil fuels toward a renewable-based future is really an opportunity, right? And it is an opportunity to invest in people and communities, and the climate crisis makes it more urgent, but there are so many reasons to do it that have nothing to do with climate, right? And that is basing our investments and acknowledging that we need to invest in communities and connecting our infrastructural investments and bringing the benefits and the jobs and the other economic benefits related to our energy system to local and regional communities. And so renewable energy, what's amazing about renewable energy and why it's transformative compared to fossil fuels is that it is abundant and plentiful, and actually every community around the whole world has access to renewable energy. We just have to invest in the technology to leverage and harness that, whether it's wind and solar, Also, there's geothermal, and in coastal communities, and obviously in Ireland, there's a lot of connection, a lot of wave, tidal potential, offshore wind, as well as onshore. So there's so much potential, and we really just need to be leveraging and figuring out how to invest in and harness that. And that's why it's really transformative. Rather than having exploitative, extractive economy, we can have a regenerative economy that is locally and regionally appropriate mix of energy. And so I think that's a really important point that I like to emphasize. I didn't, in the beginning, I forgot to mention that I was born in Ireland and lived in Dublin until I was 8, moved to Boston, and have lived here much of my life, but I've spent a lot of time back in Ireland, and I was there all summer, and I will be on sabbatical next year and will be in Dublin. So it's great to be able to connect, and I just wanted to make that connection of how a lot of what I'm talking about is relevant everywhere in the world. The book itself focuses a lot on the United States, and it's relevant in Ireland and other countries throughout the world as well. So one of the things when I talk about leadership, and this is thinking about political leadership, I talk about growing the squad. And the squad in the United States are these 4 junior congresswomen who came on the national stage just in the past 2.5 years or so. And they have just changed the political discourse about climate and energy, because they've connected it explicitly with issues of economic justice, with issues of housing and transportation and racial justice as well. And so for me, they kind of represent what this anti-racist feminist leadership that I think is so fundamental, and which really has been lacking and missing in the climate policy space. And what this kind of leadership does is really, it's based on collaboration, inclusivity, and participation. It's really about distributing wealth and power, and investing in communities and workers' rights, and reducing inequities and disparities by centering economic justice, racial justice, and social justice. And the real power is to leverage the potential for transformation by linking problems together, including the climate crisis and housing crisis and economic crisis, and linking them together. And obviously the antithesis of that is traditional patriarchal leadership that is based very much on intentionally excluding people and really intentionally trying to foster the continued concentration of wealth and power, giving more wealth and power to those who already have it. And that relies on exacerbating inequities, and it also relies on denying the problems. And this is something that I think we can all relate to in different ways. When people deny that the problem exists, whether it be the climate crisis or how bad the pandemic is, or economic crisis or housing crisis, denying that the problems are there is part of a strategy of maintaining the status quo and resisting the transformations that are needed. So the rest of my slides and the rest of my presentation here and what I'd like to share are actually specific examples of innovative, creative leaders who are doing all kinds of things. So I don't have time to go into all the details, but if you're interested, the idea with the book, and I hope even in this discussion today, is to really motivate and encourage and inspire people to get involved in linking climate action and energy transformation to all of these other issues. And there's so many ways to do that. So I'm not going to go through all the details here, but there's chapters in my book on leaders, inspiring leaders who are linking climate and energy to jobs and economic justice, leaders who are linking climate and energy to health, well-being, and nutritious food for all, leaders who are linking climate and energy to clean transportation for all and housing for all. And And I think what's really important is for us to be thinking about, as I mentioned at the beginning, leadership as something that all of us can get involved in, and really bringing that leadership to advocate for systems change. And this is moving away from the individualistic approach, which Jamie also mentioned, and acknowledging that we really need to be acknowledging the complex power dynamics of why we've done things the way we've done them, and really prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice in every policy, priority, and practices that we all engage with professionally and personally, and really advocate for local community renewable energy. And I know there's a lot of action in that space in Ireland, and there's so much more potential, right? And so I think another key piece here is also thinking about, as I mentioned at the beginning, social innovations, like supporting cooperative model of business and novel economic structures, and community owned and worker owned, which is a way to help in all different sectors to move away from the corporate control and corporate domination and influence on our policies and politics. So I'll end here by just acknowledging Mary Robinson, who is obviously internationally recognized climate justice advocate, who has pointed out that this might sound radical, but really it's a people's first approach, and that's really what the opportunity is before us. And I also honor here at the end Shirley Chisholm, who's the first Black woman who ran for president in the United States in 1972. And in some ways, a lot of things have changed since 1972, but in other ways, you know, we haven't come as far as a lot of people thought we could or should. So I will end there and just look forward to questions and the discussion. And thank you for inviting me to contribute to this.
Cheers, Jenny. That was very insightful, and thank you very much for that contribution. You know, you really opened our eyes to, you know, what you're trying to achieve, and showing the examples of all the people who have been doing it for years really kind of shows you, this isn't new. This has been going on for a long time, and if you really believe in it, and I think it kind of encompasses a lot of what our party are about, you know. And I thank you for that. We're going to do a mentee question in a minute, but I just want to encourage everybody to ask questions. You have really good experts here now. This is your chance, and don't be afraid. Like, ask a question that you believe is not as highfalutin for these kind of academics. You know, they are really good at explaining. And look, if you put it in, and if we don't get to it now, they will answer it later on. You know, but don't be afraid. Ask the questions. You know, because look, I know a little bit of sustainability and climate action, but there's lots that they can show you how to do it. I particularly like changing to fossil to renewable is a huge opportunity for local communities. I was recently down in Kilmorkey in Wexford, and I went out onto the islands, and you looked in and you saw this fantastic wind farm to the left of Kilmorkey, with no connections whatsoever to the beautiful town of Kilmorkey. You know, it's going into the grid, you know, and I'm sure if they were getting some buyback in the village, you know, they would probably be all on board for sure. But they don't, and I think that's the connection we need to make to our communities to everybody get a buy-in. So if we could put the question up online, that would be great. The question, sorry, the question. Mentimeter. Okay. Again, you probably have the link open. It's the same link anyway. 1990-8299. If you go to menti.com, 1990-8299. And the question really just following the UN's most recent climate report, which said that climate change is both inevitable and irreversible. Are you more concerned than before? So, interesting. So as we can see, it's 15 yes and at the moment 3 no. I often look at all these things because you have a bias in yourself, and I look at these and I say, okay, definitely is, definitely, but then 3, it's the minority that say, and I don't mean they're not wrong, you know, I don't know, I can't judge that, but they say no, you know, and I often look at the not the general view, but who are the, you know, to see, wonder why they believe that. And if any of you there who don't believe it, you know, please stick it in a question. I'd appreciate it. So did Jennie or Jamie want to comment on this?
Well, I would just say that this most recent UN report had kind of 3 important distinctions from previous reports. One is that it was really unequivocal. It wasn't saying, you know, there's a chance. It was saying this is definitely happening and it's very severe and it's going to get a lot worse. But it also mentioned, what's really important is that it said explicitly that what we do in the next few years will matter a lot to the future. There's some already, we're locked in already to climate changes, and we know that. But there's an urgency to what we do in the next 5-10 years, and we need to move toward that transformation as quickly as possible. So I think that is really, in some ways, this report, I think hopefully has potential to inspire action more than previous reports. Although, you know, it's the same pattern of the dire consequences are put up and then it's slow to change. But the urgency is really highlighted in this report in a more explicit way.
And Jamie?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you're back at the time of the negotiation of the Paris Agreement, the slogan of many of the small island states and civil society from the small island states was 1.5 to stay alive, was what they were calling for. And they successfully managed to have 1.5 inserted into the Paris Agreement as a target that we would try to keep below 1.5 if possible, was the wording of the agreement. And we're going to overshoot that now, it's clear. And that has huge consequences for global justice, for those communities and those states, and for us in terms of global justice. How do we respond to that? How do we stand in solidarity with those communities? So it means that every action that everything that we do now has the potential to limit the damage that's already been wrought on those communities and the effects that they're facing. So, you know, it really is urgent that we take as much action as we can in order to be able to support those who have done least to cause the problem and are faced with the consequences more quickly than we are.
And so, Councillor Ronan Mullen, we don't have a question after you. So do you want to say something about this, so we can, because your view is important to us?
Yeah, I think you've got my surname there.
Oh, sorry, I don't got my
okay.
Jesus. Sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. So, it's funny because, like, my background is sustainable development. It was 20 years ago when I finished the masters, and I guess for those 20 years I've been aware of the IPCC reports, and that in some ways we are heading towards this ravine. And you can see in those last 20 years more and more climate influenced weather events taking place. So in some respects, I nearly go with, I'm not sure if I would have said yes or no there, but no is just because I knew we are heading towards this ravine. So another report, it's just we're getting closer, but the end outcome is going to be the same. So it's a case that, look, I know this is happening, so that's it. Like another report continues to confirm what I already knew 2 decades ago. But that's why, I guess, look, when I speak in a moment, I guess I'll probably be keen to concentrate on one action that we can take to try and look at that. But it is something that, look, we are seeing, and it's continuing to happen, and the reports will continue to say the same things as they've been doing for the last 20 years.
Okay, so we're going to go into your section now, Ronan. And I just, so for anybody, just for people there, Councillor Ronan Moore is a county councillor with Meath County Council for the Social Democrats. Having spent several years working with Irish charities overseas, Ronan returned to Meath, where he also works as a secondary school teacher, an author, and obviously a councillor. Ronan has a master's in sustainable development from TU Dublin, and one of the most exciting programs of work he is currently involved in is, as a councillor, is chair of his local sustainable energy community. So you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Bill, and thanks to both Jennie and Jamie. Look, I find myself nodding so much of what Jamie and Jennie had been speaking about, very inspiring as well. And I guess what I'd like to talk about is really an action, maybe something more quite local, quite specific, and that really will help empower people. I think something like what Jamie had said, that there are things that we can do collectively and that we can do together to meet this climate emergency and in a just way. But like Jennie has says, I think it's also it's important to try and link the problems together, and in doing so, I guess positively linking people positively together. And bring everybody on board, because I think one of the challenges of this climate emergency is that there is challenges and dissent coming between different groups, which I think is sometimes fermented by those who are who have most at risk in allowing this to move forward. But it is important that people are brought together, that is a just transition. So I guess to begin, what I really would like to do is really a call to action in many respects. So for people at home, for people who are watching it, one thing that I really would suggest, if people want to do something and get involved, is around the sustainable energy communities. Something Jamie also had mentioned, and which you mentioned, Bill. I'm fortunate to be involved with in my own town of Trim. So the sustainable energy communities in the SEC, what I'd suggest is that for people to find out if there's one in your area. If there is already, then join it. If there isn't, set one up. And I guess what my ambition would be, and I guess is the idea, like a lot of us in Ireland would be very familiar with the Tidy Towns initiative, which of course has been so successful across the country, in that people, community groups that are often very much people within the community are so proud of their tidy towns. I know we are in Trim, and they do this amazing work for decades now at this stage, in moving from not just making the towns and villages and communities just more pretty, but doing all sorts of things that include biodiversity and sustainability. And in Trim, everybody's familiar with the tidy towns and everybody's very proud of it. And I'd like to see people feel the same way about the sustainable energy communities, that they feel that they can be a part of this. So the question then, I guess, is what are the sustainable energy communities? What are the SECs? They're a relatively new initiative. And I guess at the heart of these SECs is that it allows communities to identify their energy usage and then to come up with ways to reduce that, and really puts the onus, the responsibility and the power with the people who are members of this SEC, who are from these communities. An example, I guess, from ourselves, and I'll just explain a little bit about Trim SEC in a moment, but during our work, we've guesstimated our energy usage in Trim to be about 4.5 million euro. That's kind of the energy spend that we believe is being used in Trim at the moment. And if we were to reduce that by 20%, that would effectively mean there's 900,000 euro is staying in our local economy, which means local jobs, which means childcare, people being able to meet mortgage repayments, having more business for restaurants, books, bookstores, which is more jobs, more commercial rates, which in turn sees more investment in our local economy. And I know Jamie mentioned with the Preston model, which is really innovative and inspiring idea about trying to keep money in the local economy. And that's very much what the SECs can help to do. So when people think about climate change, they oftentimes see it as, what is it going to cost me? And I think it's very important to address that, is to realize that in meeting climate change, you can actually really help your own community. And it's not just, I know you hear a lot of governments saying, well, we want to address climate and there's lots of business, there's a lot of job opportunities and so on. They see it like a commercial opportunity. For me, there's a real element of local in that there's a real potential for local communities to benefit from it. So the SEC itself, then, it's a government initiative. It's under the auspices of the Sustainable Energy Ireland, SEAI. And in many ways, there could be a rightful criticism to say, well, look, it's putting the responsibility on people, that volunteers, that they are the ones who have to try and come up with the solutions. But I think one of the benefits of it is that, like, when you think about grassroots and how things work most effectively, sometimes that comes from bottom up. And if the community is the one that's driving this forward, well, then it's more likely to be sustaining in the long term. The challenge, of course, is that these SECs rely on volunteers, and volunteers by their nature have other jobs, other responsibilities, family, and so on. And as a result, sometimes cannot stay for a long period of time. So there does need to be accompaniment at the kind of professional level, whether it's at a council level, whether it's at the national level, to help SECs. And that does exist, although my experience is that it probably needs to be done more. And I guess like any initiative, there's always more that you can do. In terms of, I guess, ourselves in a Trim SEC, and give people a sense as the journey of what an SEC might be like, myself and a few other volunteers, like-minded volunteers, came together a couple of years ago and became aware of the SEC idea. We were inspired by this one other SEC that had set up in Meath, Batterstown SEC, in a small village, and through the help of their coordinator at the time, and also the support of our local council, who were very much, I'd say, ahead of their time in so much, we set up our own local SEC. And then what we did is we involved other members of the community, which is really important. So we involved, I guess, champions of the community who already were involved in work in the tidy towns, in a tourism network, in a family resource centre. And I guess together then we sat down and said, right, we want to move this forward. We want to deal with the climate, but also do things that will help people socially. And I guess one of the steps that we then took is that we now have engaged in, again, it's part of this official scheme where you engage with a consultant to undertake a master plan, and that master plan will really identify exactly how much energy you're using in your community and the cost of that, and then to identify opportunities for you to reduce that. One of the ways that ultimately will probably be a key opportunity will be retrofitting, which has been mentioned earlier on. And I guess when we think about retrofitting, sometimes we kind of think about, if you haven't experienced retrofitting, it's, look, you make your energy warmer and you save money, but there's so much more to it than that. And that we've been lucky that even though we will be at that stage, hopefully in a number of months, where we'll really try to increase the number of homes in our community, we've already had we've had three homes that have had their homes retrofitted. And we've been very lucky to have gone into that stage of the process through the help of Dunleer Energy Team, which is just over the border in Louth. And we've seen their experience of their community members who've been the benefits, or have had the benefits of this retrofitting, where they've had their homes better insulated, which has saved them money, but the social knock-ons are immense in some people's cases, where we've had people, and there's been examples, and we've been able to share these examples, where people who have had health issues during the damp winter months, who don't leave their own homes because they don't want to leave a stove to go out or a fire to go out, so they stay in their homes during the winter time, and all the psychological and the physical kind of problems that kind of come from that as well. Whereas now, because their homes are better heated and saving them money, they're able to get out knowing that when they come back, their home is warm. And it's such a transformative experience for these people. But there are challenges, and I guess that's what we have seen as well, and that's where I guess the hope is that with government and more pressure from community groups to try and to deal with these. So in this scheme, if you are somebody who might have say fuel allowance, you could get up to 80% of the work that's done in your home, and that can be great, but that still can be a significant amount of money for people, certainly in an environment at the moment where construction costs have gone up quite significantly after COVID. But for those people who might not be on fuel allowance, you're still expected to pay 65%, which is a significant amount of money if you're dealing with childcare and education costs and mortgage costs. So there are things that need to be considered. But from ourselves as an SEC, and I guess this kind of goes into this, that's been also touched upon by the other speakers, where our big ambition is to try and grow the SEC, that it becomes an owner of renewable energy. And that for us is our grand ambition. So what we would love to see is a situation, certainly I would love to see, is where if we have a bit of solar energy in there that we develop, or even a wind turbine, that when people look at that, they know it's generating money for their community. And that money can be used in a number of ways. One, it could be a case that if you're in the community, you can buy your energy not off a large multinational energy provider, but actually off trim SEC, and you're buying it for basically market leading rates, because we're not there to, our shareholders are our community, that's our responsibility. And this is the idea where we want to change that debate, where people see solar or renewable and they're resistant to it, and they see it's not benefiting them, whether that be in, as I said, a city, or whether it be in a rural area, where they're like, it's all very good to say put up wind turbines, but like, how does that affect me? Where people have a sense of pride that this is owned by me, it's owned by me, and it's helping me. It's also helping me and my neighbours with the expense of retrofitting my home, to make my home more livable, and to allow me to do all the things that I can do, and then pass it on to the next generation to my children. And that's what I think for ourselves is really one of the things that we would like to move towards. I think that's there's probably a few other points, but I think that it's not cognizant of time, Bill. I'm sure there's probably a lot of discussion to happen. But as I said, it's to finish up with, I guess, is that there are opportunities there, and the SECs is one of those that I do think that people should and could consider something that they might like to look into, because there is a huge amount of opportunities there that it gives people. I'll leave it at that for the moment, Bill.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Ron. That was very insightful. I'm kind of get involved with the sustainable energy community at the early stage in NACE here, and it is I found it a tricky process, but we have a good group and we're getting our heads around it. But I love the idea of, owning your own solar and selling to the local. I think that's very, very visionary, or win. And I think when people get something from it, they will, buy into it, Okay, so there are some questions for all the panel, and look, jump in if you think you're the one to answer it, and we'll go down through it. And I'm delighted to see lots of 14 questions, so to keep us going till the end. Okay, so from Aurelia, regarding the 2050, can you see the questions there, our panelists? Can you see them? Yeah, okay, so regarding the 2050 zero carbon economy goal for the EU, how do we ensure governments and private companies are held accountable for their targets? Should there be sanctions if those are not met? Anybody? Jamie?
Thanks, Bill. I mean, the EU has used sanctions in environmental regulation for many years now, and we in Ireland intended to break the regulation and pay for the sanction. And so I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier around hearts and minds. Sanctions are one part of a way of introducing change, but unless the government is going to be held to account by its people, by the people, then sanctions are not going to be as effective as we'd like them to be. So it has to be, I think that the answer has to be that deep-rooted change that we need to begin to capitalize a sea change in people's thinking in our communities, and projects like what Ronan has been speaking about are great examples of how we're already doing that, and that work is in progress. It's just a question of continuing it and scaling it up and resourcing it.
Yeah. So Aurelia has another question there, and maybe Jennie, this might be you. Should there be more pressure from public on pension funds to greenify their investments?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of strategies, right, to encourage the changes, especially, I think, and there's another question later on also about kind of investments. And I think the answer is yes. The fossil, there's all different strategies and different approaches to try to get the fossil fuel companies to act differently. Obviously, it's against their very, purpose and they're very strongly committed to continuing to use reliant on fossil fuels. So I think Sarah also asked the question about is legal pressure effective, holding fossil fuel companies accountable through legal means. And I think, again, those strategies have some influence, and they definitely raise some public perception in new and different ways. And I think all of the above is the approach. So I think, yes, all different strategies are being used, and they all have some different kinds of impact. And it's really, really hard because they're so powerful.
And I'm probably the next question. I'm not sure who'd like to take this one. It refers to can Ireland manage to fully move away from carbon without nuclear power? And then there was another in the chat saying you can't build your own nuclear power, and that's obviously a thing. But that's a huge question. I think it's more of a political one rather than a technical one. Looking, the days of what was that big one in New York, 5 Mile Island? Was that the big one? And then obviously Chernobyl and stuff. Is there can without nuclear power, can we completely go green with wind, solar, geothermal? What do you think? Do you want to go for that, Ronan?
I get the ball rolling. Like if I put the answer for me as an I don't know, like I think one of the dangers, and I understand like there's a slight kind of increasing discussion. I don't know what the percentage is at 1585, and that you kind of need an element of nuclear so when renewable drops off. And that's one of the arguments that's been put forward by certain groups. But I think there's a danger of going down the line of, like, I guess for me, is a question about my pay grade. So for the time being, what I'm focused on is ways of actually both reducing energy usage, but also increasing renewable within the community. And one of the big problems with increasing renewable, for many respects, is that there's an increasing amount of people who are against it and are more likely to listen to arguments against it because they don't see the benefits of it. So you see advertisements at the moment on television talking about different multinationals and how much energy they're producing, and this could power X amount of homes. But part of me is like, well, it also maybe would power a small amount of a data center which you're allowing into the state, and that's what we don't want. And I don't want a situation where we just feel, you know what, by having nuclear, then we're in the clear when we're not. And I think there is questions that the government have to answer first in terms of reducing, and are they realistic about how they want to reduce their energy usage? And then if we can do all that we can do, then maybe the conversation, but I still don't think we're there yet. And I think there's a lot more that we should be doing. And I think data centers being that one example where in the past we used to bury our waste in the ground. It was like, oh sure, it's fine, it's in the ground, forget about it. And now we have a situation where everything is in the cloud, as if the cloud is somehow fine, but it's not. It relies on data centers, which uses huge amounts of energy resources, which we have in Ireland. And it's like, well, that's not what we want to be doing either. So I think they're the difficult questions that need to be answered first before we get into this. And in the meantime, we do the best we can for me on a local level.
Yeah, the next question really goes to you as well, as a politician. Denmark does a good job of community wind turbines you spoke about earlier on, and the question is, what's the right mix of national versus local policy solutions? I don't know if even local policy, the only local policy we actually have saying it, we have very little to say on it really, don't we, as councillors? It's all national.
Yeah.
The local county development plans, that's about it really, isn't it?
Yes, but I'll let the other speakers in for the nuclear, so I'd love to hear their thoughts. I'm sure they'd be more...
Oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Sky, sorry.
Just on that before I jump out is that I think one of the problems I find at the moment is that I spoke to a friend who was very much involved in community energy usage in, I think it was Tipperary, a long number of years ago, and now he has mentioned that the environment, the national legislation environment has never been more welcoming to this, that community organisations can get involved. But for me, as I've grown and learned more about it, it feels like you certainly have heard about this great bus that you can get onto, that you can start potentially producing your own your energy, but that bus is leaving already. It's like, I'm only learning about it and I'm trying to jump on this bus at the same time. And in a volunteer group, as other volunteer SCCs across the country, that's difficult. And you're up against large multinationals who understand what they need to be doing. So that is a challenge, but I think there's some very meaty questions. I'd love to hear the thoughts of Jamie and Jennie on in terms of that is.
Yeah. Your views on the nuclear, that's the big question, isn't it?
Well, I could speak to both and kind of connect these here. I think that the simple answer is that nuclear isn't essential. There's so much renewable potential that that definitely, especially with reduction in energy use, as you're talking about, Ronan, it's not essential. And some people argue that building any new nuclear right now is like building apartment block with no toilets. If you think about the waste issues associated with nuclear. So there, it's very controversial, and it doesn't facilitate these bigger social changes that we're talking about. It kind of assumes we can't do those, and therefore we just want to have a replacement for the fossil fuels, and that could be nuclear. So within the energy democracy frame, there's so many other reasons to distribute power with renewable energy that is not just about climate. So I think that's a really important piece to remember. With regard to the local versus national policies, and also the benefits, and I think all of us have been reinforcing this idea that yes, when communities own and they're benefiting from the energy, that is the model that works, right? Across the world, we see that. So that's where we need to work toward, and the resistance is diminished when people benefit, whether it be farmers benefiting or local communities, and really having local and community ownership is also really powerful, and it's a different model. So that's where it takes innovation. It's not easy because as we don't yet have all the policies in place. And so with regard to policies, I think alignment of policies at international, national, and local is when we can really move toward transformation. So it's all are important, and when they're aligned, you can actually have bigger changes.
Okay. I know, Jamie, you want to get in there. We do have a lot of questions, and unless you want to say something quick.
Yeah, well, maybe just to say, I mean, I've been looking at a lot of the questions, and the last comment there from Aoife, I think, for me, sums it up. We need a change in philosophy, she says, in how we structure our societies and lives and priorities. So there are no easy answers to these questions, because the climate crisis and the solution, the responses we need to make to it, touch everything. And require us to really, search deeply within us about, how are we relating to each other? How are we relating to the limited resources of the planet? How are we structuring our societies? So it's a complicated problem with no easy answers. And so, to my mind, the only way forward is to build strong democratic systems, deliberative democratic systems that are inclusive, that are participatory, that can enable us have these conversations in a way that brings all voices to the table, resources those voices who've been traditionally marginalized, and values them, and then we have to trash it out together. There is no quick fix or easy answer, and I appreciate that those of us who are on the panel have thought about this a lot, so we have some things to say, but we're no more expert than anybody else in how we live our lives. Everyone here has something to say.
Yeah, that should be on a t-shirt. We have to trash this out together, because it has good meaning, on these sayings. But another question there is the airline industry. How do we ever reduce carbon emissions from the airline industry? I know they can bring in, very efficient engines and stuff, but just that amount of energy to get off the ground, and we all know it, we feel it, we've been there. Have anybody any views on that? How they can improve? Is it ever possible to improve the airline industry?
Maybe the days of Ryanair flights are over.
Yeah.
I think transportation, and in particular air travel, is it's a great question, Claire, because that's literally the one of the most hardest pieces to imagine a different future, other than changing our assumptions of how much we travel, and also how much we also move products and other material goods around the world. That's also a challenge. So, there are potential for renewable based or other technological changes that could change that, but as it is really difficult. And there was a solar plane that flew around the world. It was a small plane that had to keep stopping along the way. But transportation, and particularly air travel, is.
Yeah, one of our previous speakers, Heinrich, said, that, we're on a journey. It's not all about targets. We have to do this by 2030, 2050, whatever. It's a journey. And at least we start on the journey, we'll get there. You won't come to forks in the road and do different things. But that did strike me, the way he said that, and it kind of got rid of some of the anxiety I'd feel about everything that's happening. But there's a question there, Peter Moore. One of the main arguments against taking action is that point where bigger countries are not pulling their weight. And I read recently now, look, there's a lot of stuff coming up about China opening more coal power and all that. But isn't that more like you'd see it on a Fox News? What about China? What about India? That's not, to me, that's not the point. The point is we have to start our journey, and maybe at some stage they'll start their journey in a different way. Well, what's your views on that? That's an international question, so who wants to take that?
Just maybe just there's two points. Just to go back on last one in terms of the air travel. I think one positive thing from COVID we can take is the fact that so many more business meetings are going to take place online virtually, and that's going, when you consider the numbers who use air travel, and when you reduce that, that's significant. Although we have to also realize that this is about a just transition, and there's thousands upon thousands of people who work in the aviation industry, and that also has to be considered too. But look, and I wouldn't want people to feel, oh, I can't go on a family holiday out to Lanzarote, when, look, the other element is that we are showcasing what we're doing in Ireland much more in terms of people staying here, but at the same time, I think there are opportunities. But one touch on that particular question from Peter. For me, I think the key thing, what I would like to be a takeaway, is that viewing this just transition as an opportunity. And I know I'm coming back to the SEC, but like someone else had mentioned about, can you create your own kind of energy from the SEC in terms of your own community energy? And the answer to that is very much yes. And there's so many more examples of this over in continental Europe and also the UK, where you have community groups that own their own energy. So for me, it's a case of, look, yeah, I want those countries to be doing more, but for me, in my community, I want the opportunity to be able to create my own energy source that actually contributes to things. Not only, it doesn't have to be even retrofitting, it could be to community organizations within where I live. People's lives are better, their homes are warmer, they feel it's more sociable, all those elements that go with that. And that's, for me, is this win-win-win situation that comes from sustainable development, and this just transition does present us. And if we focus on that, I think we'll have more reward.
Absolutely. I would just second that, and also say that in addition to, it's an opportunity for leadership and to model. Ireland is a unique country, and Jamie also mentioned, has a strong social solidarity culture, and a lot of renewable resources. So there's so much potential to be a leader, and then other countries will look to Ireland to say, like, look what's happening there,
Just need a couple of questions coming in. Say, should the state versus private companies be pushing renewables? Back in the 70s, and someone also mentioned hydropower there as well. Back in the 70s or even before, we put in quite a significant amount of hydroelectric power in Ireland, and that probably is the same throughout the world. And then stopped doing everything for whatever reason. But and they did a good job of it. What's your thoughts, state versus private? Anyone?
I really like Jennie's point around looking at alternative models, cooperative models, community-based models. It isn't just a binary state versus private. If we can think outside the box, there are other ways of structuring our economy and meeting our needs.
Yeah.
And I think that as well, in ourselves, in our community, like, you are trying to work with all groups. It's not just your homeowners, it's your community groups as well, but also your retailers, your multiples. I know someone mentioned earlier on about kind of farmers as well. Like, they're a large employer and large businesses, and they can be involved in this, and they reduce their costs. So I think there is a role to play for everybody if they can be helped to understand exactly how best they can do this.
Yeah, Cormac has a question there for SECs. Is there any scope for small-scale power generation projects, hydropower, wind power? Yeah, Ronan, that's obviously your vision. That's what you'd like to do. And I suppose the other panelists for their part of the country and part of the world, the small scale in the States, I know it's a huge thing. You'll see people living off the grid all the time, and there is challenges to it. You know, it's tricky, but just Tipperary energy, you know, the one down at Clough-Jordan, you know, they've tried. Are they completely off the grid? Can it be done? What do you think?
I don't see why not. I think that's the way you try to aim towards.
Yeah. Anybody else got a view? Nope. Okay.
I was
Guys,
just
go
oh, sorry.
on. No, go
I was
ahead.
just
Go ahead,
respond-
Jenny. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to respond to Cormac's question about the negative aspects, and like every technology has negative aspects. So managing those and integrating the benefits into the to distributing the benefits are really key. And when we think about the health impacts of fossil fuels, those have been underestimated and underappreciated for so long that the renewable options have fewer negative aspects, not to say they don't have any. So thank you.
Great. Listen, that has been fantastic, and I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate all the 60 participants who came to look, because that's, you know, it's great to be in a room like that. And if we were in a room, it would look fantastic. Please accept our thanks to Jennie, Ronan, and Jamie for answering all the questions. You obviously know your stuff, and that's the best kind of panelists. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.